All right, everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We are so excited to have you for the Smart Contracts for Accountants presented by Garrett Wasny. Garrett is a certified management consultant and award-winning digital skills advisor for accountants, tax attorneys, enrolled agents, and tax preparers worldwide. My name is Cherie Tennessee, and I will be your moderator today. And thank you again for joining us. And I'm going to type this information into the Q&A. We will be using the Q&A instead of the chat. We want to make sure that we're focused on the content that's being shared. But if you have any technical issues, please contact our office at 1-800-966-6679 extension 0. If you are looking for the handouts, please be sure to visit the NSA Learning Center to secure that information. Understanding that in order to receive the CPEs, you must participate and be here for the entire session. We will have 8 polling questions, and 6 of those must be answered in order for you to receive your certification. We'll be uploading the credits to the IRS at the end of the month, and the CPEs will be available after 14 business days, and then the recordings will be posted on a delayed schedule in the next couple of weeks. With that, I hand it over to you, Garrett, and thank you everyone for joining us again.
Great, thanks so much, Cherie. Welcome everyone. Today we have an incredible topic that is below the radar, but it's about to explode. So important. It is absolutely transformative the way it's impacting the business world and the accounting profession. And we're going to be talking about this concept called smart contracts. So what are those? Let's get right into it. So here's what we're going to be talking about today. First of all, I'll define what is a smart contract, and what it is. It's computer code. It's a software application that automates the if this then that part of a traditional contract. When we have traditional contracts, usually they're on a Word file or a PDF file. And what happens is on the written contract, that you have an agreement, of course, and you have the different parties and they come to an agreement on, okay, if you do this, I'll do that. If you do that, I'll do this. So there's negotiated conditions up front. When they're met, you have the exchange of money when the goods or services are exchanged. And what a smart contract does, it does it automatically. The computer does that. It automates those traditional contracts and has this self-executing capability and logic to it. We'll look at that in more detail. We'll also look at just some of the backstory and key considerations you need to know about smart contracts, and that they reside or they live on what's known as blockchains. And often when people hear blockchains, people think, oh, non-fungible tokens and Bitcoin. And this is really important that you don't conflate the two, because blockchain is this foundational operating technology. It's like an operating system. Bitcoin is just one use case on blockchain. So blockchain is not Bitcoin, right? It's really important that you separate those two. They're completely different. And we'll do a more of a deep dive on that. We'll also talk about all the amazing things that you can do with smart contracts and are being done with smart contracts that you can look at. Examples, we'll look at what's going on in Europe, and they're using smart contracts for auto sales. They're using that in logistics and the supply chain. There's a number of major use cases in the oil and gas industry. And in construction, they're just increasing the velocity of money and reducing overhead costs and lower billing rates. They're able to better identify where products can come from and whether or not they're exactly what they ordered. We'll also look at just how beneficial that they are. We'll look at how they are able to provide more security and auto-sufficient, which means you're not relying on an outside party, where once you go into a smart contract and you set up the conditions ahead of time, you can just set it and forget it. For the most part, it's done automatically. But that said, it's important that you recognize that there is some challenges, there's some operational risk, there's some technical risk, and the regulatory authorities, the governance of the governments, just hasn't not yet kept pace with the technology, and there's that gap between what the technology can do and what the regulations oversee. And that is an issue at this time, but we'll walk you through that. We'll also talk about this concept called an oracle. Okay, when you think of the word oracle, you may think of the company with Larry Ellison called Oracle Software. It's not that. An oracle is this link between the physical world and the online world, the digital world. and you have different types of oracles. But basically, the oracle is a truth seeker. It determines whether or not the inputs inputted into that smart contract are correct, current, and complete. So you'll have basically a blockchain audits itself, but an oracle audits all the different inputs that are coming in. So whatever information is fed into the blockchain, it's looking at that and saying, okay, is this real? Is this not? Is this fake? Is this phony? So it's really important that as an accountant, you realize what an oracle is, because that is a key function that accountants will need to participate in. Another question too is, are smart contracts the same as legally binding contracts? And the answer is a definitive, absolutely, it depends. There's a number of contextual legal issues that you have to consider, and we'll walk you through some of the key differences, but there's a lot of similarities between the two. We'll also talk about how you're probably already using a smart contract, but you don't know it. And we'll give you about half a dozen different examples that are available right now that are online, that where you can look at take advantage of smart contracts. Then we're going to look at some other case studies that are really interesting. We're going to look at this concept of subrogation and parametric insurance and what those are. And those are evolving and emerging and exploding areas of smart contracts that accountants need to be aware of. And then we're going to also look at how smart contracts are really booming in China and how it's being used by the energy and trade finance and real estate, for example. We'll also look at what are the opportunities, what are the rules for accountants moving forward in smart contracts, what are some specific things that you can do right now, how can you start preparing yourself and positioning yourself to take advantage of this world. And then we're going to look at some half a dozen or so ways how it's on course and it's on track and it's on a trajectory to completely transform the accounting profession. We'll also look at who are some of the leading developers at this point. It's still a very work in progress, and it's there's still very much kind of a wild west out there, but there are some leaders at this time you need to be aware of. And then there's all these amazing resources too that you need to be aware of. There's a number of industry associations, alliances, and a number of chambers of digital commerces that you need to be aware of. And also, if you want to take your understanding and training and knowledge of smart contracts next level, there's all these different courses that you can take, and some are like really inexpensive too. So it's not as if you have to go back to school for like 5 years or something like that. You can just do it in a couple hours. It's absolutely incredible. And then we'll just kind of peer into our crystal ball and we'll look ahead about what's ahead for smart contracts. We'll look at some of the evolving standards. We'll look at something that's called the Common Accord, which is like the equivalent to the generally accepted accounting principles. It's like the generally accepted smart contract principles that they're trying to develop. They're trying to develop a gap equivalent for the smart contract world. Okay, so what I want you to take away from today are three things. Number one is smart contracts they're essentially computer programs, software, that contain business logic designed to automate contract performance. In a typical contract, if you do this, I'll do that. If you do that, I'll do this. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing, they're still in their infancy, but the standards are rapidly evolving, and smart contracts are really on course to radically transform the online commerce and in the accounting profession overall. And perhaps most importantly is that smart contracts offer all these amazing opportunities for CPAs and enrolled agents and tax attorneys and tax preparers and tax agents to automate contracts within their own operations, and they could offer smart contract advisory services, and they can use that to enhance their reputation as trusted business advisors, as arbiters of truth and protectors and guardians of the public trust. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So it's so much to talk about. Okay, that said, though, before we begin, I want to make this very clear that I am an independent consultant. I'm a sole practitioner. I have no commercial or vested interest in any of these companies or applications that I'm going to be talking about today. I'm not a vendor. I'm not a marketer. I'm not a distributor. I have no merchandising agenda whatsoever. I have no affiliation with any accounting or engineering consulting firm. I don't sit by design on purpose on any tech boards or councils or committees. All the information I'm providing today is based on objective, impartial, and independent and nonpartisan due diligence, and it's based on conversations and consultations I've had with CPAs all across the United States and actually all over the world. Okay, so that said, what is a smart contract? Okay, what a smart contract is, they're pieces of computer code that will automatically manage a business agreement that and execute legal contracts that people have between another. And they function, they're triggered when predetermined conditions are met. And the whole point of the smart contract, it can automate that contract process. It can automate all these different processes and functions, and it can enable these functions to process rapidly, immediately, without the need of an intermediary, for example. So what will happen is this creates this new element of trust, because the function, when it's determined ahead of time, it's already predetermined. Everyone knows in advance, if you do this, this will happen. If I do that, this will happen. There's no gray area. They know with absolute certainty that if you perform your part of the deal, then you absolutely will get paid. And the concept of a smart contracts, it's already here, and you use it every time you see a vending machine. We all see vending machines all the time. You see them now at where you used to get all of your Coke and beverages, but now I was at the airport on the weekend. Now they have vending machines for all kind of electronics and all kind of food products. It's amazing. But what it is with a vending machine, you look at the vending machine, of course, and you look at the different options that they have, and then you look at the choices, and then you push a button saying, "I want a Coke," and then you put in your money, maybe your credit card or your dollar or dollar bill, and then that activates the coded instruction. So that tells you the machine to give you the soda or whatever item that you selected and purchased. So basically, a smart contract is just like a vending machine. They both do the same thing. They store rules, they verify rules, and then they self-execute rules. Okay, let me explain that. So for example, every vending machine has a rule that if you insert $1, you'll get a snack of choice, and you push the button. So once you actually insert $1, it verifies that that is the right amount of money that you gave in. So again, you store the rules. The rules are, hey, you pick your soda, you insert $1, those are the rules, and then you'll get it back. Then they verify the rules by saying, okay, put in your credit card, put in your money, and let's verify that that is the correct amount of currency. And then after that, after verification of that, the machine goes, okay, we've said what the rules are. We've verified that you've given us the right amount of money. And then it's self-executed. You get the soda. It just rolls out. Whoever thought using a vending machine would be that complicated? But it's this simple concept, but there's a lot going on there, more than people realize. But a vending machine is just this perfect, seamless, frictionless way of doing commerce. You identify what you want, you put in your money, it's verified that the money that you put in is correct, and then you get what you want in return. Wouldn't it be great if every transaction that we have was like that, where you could order something and you get it right then? Or if you're the seller, you could get your money immediately, and you don't need a lawyer, you don't need a broker, there's no escrow agent, there's no government corporation, there's no other attorneys present, there's no somebody with a clipboard and a cigar looking over your shoulder saying, you didn't do this right. It's very simple. And what you can think of is smart contracts are just like that. They're highly secure digital vending machines. And it's this agreement between the buyer and the seller that's directly written into the code, and it can help you exchange anything of value in this transparent and conflict-free way. Well, you can avoid any kind of services or insertion of any kind of middle person, for example, and that's the whole point of this. So if the rules are met, the agreement is enforced. If X happens, then Y is triggered, but it only happens if and when all conditions are met. So let's just back to the vending machine example. If you push the button and then you only put in 50 cents, then it's not going to work, because the rule is $1. Or you press the 7-Up button and then you put in your credit card, but your credit card is maxed out or doesn't work, you're not going to get your drink, right? So it only works if you've met the rules, and the rules have been verified only when all the conditions are met. And same too with smart contracts. You can't say, okay, I want this service delivered to me, but then when you don't provide your end of the deal, it's not going to work. Okay, so that's an important consideration moving forward. Okay, some of the key considerations too is that these smart contracts, they're unique pieces of technology, but what they do is they live, or they're based on what's known as blockchains. And what blockchains are, they're digital ledgers. they're online databases, and they're updated as they happen. And what'll happen is that when you go online, you can connect to this database, and then you'll see what you see is what everybody else sees. And then that copy of that particular smart contract in that particular blockchain is dispersed. There's multiple copies of it amongst all the people on that blockchain. And what this does, they have this agreement with using a blockchain. It's that it's decentralized. So that smart contract is deployed and is present on all nodes of a network. So maybe you have a smart contract, maybe there's like 5 or 6 people involved in the execution of the smart contract, the different shippers and receivers and restaurants. And that smart contract will only be executed unless everyone in that network on that blockchain has agreed that they have reviewed what the key conditions were up front, and they have said, yeah, those results have been satisfied. And what a blockchain is, it's this growing database of records. And it's every record that you add to the blockchain, it's known as a block. It's a data package where you have information about the transaction and who made it and who received it and what date of time and how much was involved. And they're all linked and secured using this cryptographic security. And smart contracts, they're distributed, so everybody on the contract is the same copy. They're synchronized in the sense that everyone has the same view of the data at the same time. They're real time in the sense that all the transactions are recorded as they happen, so it's in real time. And also, they're immutable in the sense that they can't be changed once they're entered. And ideally, they're secure and tamper-proof as much as they can be. I mean, nothing, when you're on the internet, there's always some chance of some hacker, but they're as secure as the highest form of security is available right now on the internet. And that it will only be deployed, that you will only get that 7-up at the specified times and under the certain exact conditions that were specified upfront in that smart contract. And we'll talk about this a little bit later about how you can set up a smart contract saying, okay, there'll be a certain, let's say, insurance payout be provided if there is a certain weather condition, if temperature drops below a certain ratio, for example, or there's an earthquake, for example, and it's like a 8.6 or something on the Richter scale. And there is some measurement of a natural disaster, or there's some measurement of an external event that will trigger that particular smart contract, and that will enable payment of an insurance claim, for example. So that's one way that you're moving forward. And also, smart contracts, they're generally, though not exclusively, paid out in cryptocurrencies. So that's an important consideration. That, you know, some smart contracts will use like Bitcoin or altcoin, which are alternatives to Bitcoin, but some now will use just regular currency. They'll hook up to a credit card or some online system of payment, for example, and they'll use that to exchange currency. Another consideration too is that a smart contract, it's not necessarily smart. You've heard that old adage, I mean, garbage in, garbage out, right? And it's so true in the computer world, and it's especially true in the smart contract world. It's that smart contract, or so-called smart contract, it's only as smart as the information you feed into it and the machine code that directs it. And you have a situation where it may not be an appropriate contract, where the smart contract, if it's not legally binding, or it may be only part of a broader contract, or if it violates the law, then it's not binding, it's not enforceable. We'll look at that a little bit more in detail a little bit later as well. But one thing you need to recognize too is that smart contracts, you look at this from a new and you think, oh my goodness, this is something I've never seen before, I can't believe it. But you just realize so much of our lives now are being automated, all these different processes. And you look at that, you look at the stock market, you have all these robo-advisors, or you have all these different stop loss orders where if the price falls below a certain amount or rises above a certain amount, then you'll have the robo traders that will buy or sell at market. There's all these different trading algorithms, all these smart order routers, you know, the automatic teller machine, automatic pay bill systems, all these instant money transfer apps like PayPal, for example. All that is part of this automation transformation that is taking part. So this is just the latest part of that. And another element too another driver for smart contracts is that most of the world still today is based on this kind of just trust us paper promises. When you go to a bank, you go to a financial institution, you go to a consultant, you'll join an organization, they'll just say, oh yeah, just sign this piece of paper and here's the contract. And we promise, just trust us that we'll do what we say that we do. And when you think about it, that's like crazy. What is trust? It's just this blind faith. It's this hope. It's this expectation. It's just this intangible feeling that what they say they'll do is what they'll actually do. And so much of our economy still runs like that. Just say, I trust you that you'll do this. Whereas smart contracts, there is no trust. Just saying, listen, we want scientific proof. We want to use math and physics and GPS readings and other definitive signals from the real world to confirm that you delivered this product or service. And only then will we give you the money. And you look at everything from all these different Ponzi schemes and Bernie Madoff and all these NFT debacles that we've seen in recent years, making all these promises saying, just trust us. So you're seeing this migration, this movement, this evolution from this just trust us paper promises to more and more companies and organizations saying, no, if we're going to do business, we want evidence, we want scientific proof. We want that built in, we want that baked into the smart contract that you delivered what you say you would. We want that built in to the contract up front so everyone knows what everyone else is expecting. Okay, and here are some uses for it very quickly. This is put together by Deloitte, and just you're only limited by your imagination, but just in the area of financial services, things in activities and tasks like trade clearing and settlement, when they're using that for the letters of credit, for example, or they're using it for an insurance claim processing that'll look at if you have an agreement up front where it'll look at and check for errors and approval workflows, and it'll do that automatically. You'll see in the life sciences area, for example, they're using it now, smart contracts for electronic medical records, whereas before somebody would have their healthcare records, but you weren't certain who had access to it. What you could have is have a smart contract saying, listen, only those people who are authorized to look at those records can do so. And there's certain conditions ahead of time that they have to meet to give them access. And if they don't have that access, they won't get access to it as well. And then you have it using for royalty distribution. So all these different artists and songwriters and singers and photographers and painters, and they may have a system in place, a smart contract in place that calculates and distributes royalty payments. So they'll have a blockchain, they'll have a smart contract that tracks exactly how many times a song is played, and every time that song is played, that is recorded, that's tracked on the blockchain, and then that money will flow instantly to the artist. And then there's all these other elements and use cases as well. They're using in supply chain. IBM, for example, has their own service called TradeLens and IBM Food Trust, and we'll talk about that in a bit and how they're using that to secure the supply chains and eliminate food waste and spoilage and contamination throughout the entire supply chain. In Denver, of all places, they have their own blockchain and smart contracts related to voting. So what'll happen is they'll have a voter, they'll log on to a blockchain, they'll verify their identity, and only after they verified who they say that they are will they be allowed to vote. So there's all these incredible use cases that are moving forward. And here's a classic example. There's a company in Germany and France, they're called Auto1 FinTech, and they offer all these smart contracts. So they introduced this a couple of years ago, but now that's the only way if you want to lease a car and buy a car with these companies now, it's all on the smart contract. So all the manual input and paper gone. Everything's finished. So everything's now is digital, and the smart contracts now track the entire life cycle of the vehicle. And every vehicle related transaction now are based in a single agreement. And so anybody who wants to buy a car, they could just go on to Auto One, and they could go into the blockchain, and they could see the different smart contracts that have been developed with that car, and they can look at the history, all the repairs, all the services, all the mechanics, all the details. Every item that you can imagine that has taken place in the car, you can go online and see the history of that. You're also seeing it in logistics, and people don't realize how much friction there are is in the delivery, like shipping and transportation and the trucking. You know, the actual gas is in the labor is the least of it. Almost like a quarter of all the costs just go to paper transactions, and there's something like almost like $150 billion a day that are tied up in disputes in the transportation industry, because they'll get a shipment delivered, but when they get it delivered, they send an invoice, but they don't pay the invoice. But the average wait time before receiving payment, the average is almost a month and a half. And so what'll happen is many businesses have millions of dollars tied up in their accounts. And what's happened is there's been a number of growing companies now that have tried to address this, what is called ShipChain, and they offer smart contracts platform for transport and logistics. So you're in shipping, you're in transportation, you're in driving the big rig, and you want to be able to set up these smart contracts in advance, so everyone knows that if you drop off the containers or drop off the shipment at this product, at this price, at this location, at this precise time, that you will get paid immediately. And so what they do is they use blockchain technology to track all the shipments down to the foot as it leaves at factory, and the way it makes its way to the final customer. And then all the information on route, that route of the truck, or they'll go to where, let's say, a food grower is, and where they pick the blueberries or the strawberries or the raspberries. And then they'll track it. Okay, here's the fresh fruit products. They put it on a truck, tracked. Here's the truck as it's traveling across Mexico, tracking that. Here's when it crosses the US border, tracking that. Here's where they may put it on a ship, or here's where it's delivered at a Walmart. All that's tracked and recorded. And then when those strawberries or fruit are finally delivered, and they have to be delivered in a pristine condition, they can't be damaged, they can't be spoiled, they can't be contaminated, then and only then will Walmart or some other receiver say, okay, you've met the terms, we've got the fruit, it meets all these conditions of healthiness, the sanitary conditions, now we will pay you, and we'll pay you immediately. So the whole time, everyone on that supply chain, they get real-time visibility, everyone knows what the rules are, and if that process breaks at any time, people can just see where the issue is. You're also seeing this in the oil and gas industry, and there's this pilot project. It's called the Oil and Gas Blockchain Consortium. And what they did is they had some oil and gas wells in North Dakota, and what they previously done is to keep the oil and gas wells running properly, they'd have to deliver water to the wellhead just to provide some cooling and some cleaning and some other lubrication factors to the wellhead. And before they had smart contracts, everything was done by hand, literally. They would bring the water container in there and they would drop the water off. There'd be disputes about, did they actually even bring the water at all? Or maybe the person dropped in the water didn't drop the whole load off. Or maybe the person who was there but wasn't there was taking a lunch break there, so the person just left. So there was all these discrepancies, there was all these disputes. So what happened was, when COVID hit, they said, okay, this is crazy. We can't, we want to limit human contacts. So let's, as much as possible, let's set up these digital sensors. Let's set up these wireless transmissions. Let's set up a blockchain ledger system. Let's automatically record all these different transactions that take place. So what happened was, before COVID, everything was done by hand, manually delivered, manually measured, manually approved. And now after COVID, they put in all these trustless transactions technology, limited human contact. So owners of the truck with the water, they would drive onto a scale that would be automatically recorded on a sensor and a weigh scale that would automatically feed into the blockchain with saying, okay, here's the amount of water that was recorded at this particular time. And what that did is that instead of having that paper flow, it had just accelerated like everything. So that workflow previously was like 120 days, and that was shrunk down to like a week, if in some cases even a day. There was no manual intervention whatsoever. And you were able to automatically validate almost 90% of the volume measurements from multiple parties. Whereas before, they would have somebody at the wellhead who would get the water and they would say, okay, well, you have a container full of water, but is it actually full of water? Is it full? And what they would do is they would take a measuring stick or some yardstick and literally stick it in the hole of the water truck just to measure, hey, you say you have water, but is it really full or not? Is it only half full? So what they did is with that new measuring system, they were able to confirm, okay, absolutely, this is the amount of water that we got. They're automatically able to trigger execution. They were able to send the money to that water company immediately. All this reduced financial risk, and that just improved processes all around. You're also seeing this in construction, and construction is like huge. You talk about friction, you talk about waste, but the bigger the project, the more likely it is to go off budget. 95% of construction projects are not completed within 3% of their budgeted cost. And it's even worse on mega projects. So any mega project that's over $1 billion, almost 98% of them experience some sort of cost overrun. Okay, so what's happened is there's late payment penalties, there's increased cost of capital, there's all these trade capital expenses, there's all this payment administration that they have to deal with here. And there's a company called Data Gumbo that offers this service to construction companies. And again, I'm not promoting Data Gumbo. I'm not saying they're good. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying here's an example of what the services they provide. And what they do is they create these smart contracts for construction companies. And what they'll do is they'll set up these pre-agreed terms where they'll say to the construction companies and suppliers, and they'll say, okay, listen, you want to be a supplier to this construction project? Okay, but we want you to verify that what you're delivering will be tracked by using scanners, by using drones, by using sensors, by using video camera, by using imagery, for example. All these are cryptographic scientific evidence that you have delivered what you say that you were delivered. And then those are built into the smart contract. And then if they deliver the product or service that they said they would, and they're able to verify that they delivered the product that they say they would, then and only then they would get paid. But if they delivered on time, that they would get paid accordingly and we get paid much faster. So the whole point of this is that it just frees up all this working capital for both the construction companies and the suppliers and the owners, the operators, the developers. They only pay for what's actually delivered or executed. And there's much less money and attention and hassle focused in on trade credit card charges, for example, that may sit within a supply chain. So what will happen is that every time there's a transaction, every time there's a delivery, every time there's some product or service that's put on a construction site, that is posted, that is shared, that is made visible on that blockchain, on that smart contract. And anybody who's a party to that can see it in real time. So this blockchain, the smart contract, acts as this independent, shared, and single source of truth. And you could have multiple people looking at that data at the same time. And here is just a quick graphic of what it used to look like. So the top row here, they'll have a construction project and they'll have somebody coming on delivering a product, let's say bricks or sand or something, and then they have the field where you'd be at the actual construction site, and they'd say, okay, we've received the information and we've received the product, and that could be anywhere from 60 to 120 days in some cases. Then so they would get it in the construction site, they'd have to verify that it was there, and they'd have all this paperwork to fill out. Then it would have to go to the contractor's office, and then they would have to certify it, and there'd be different invoices, there could be disputes, there could be some final invoices generated, and then it would go to customer systems where the construction company would relay to their accounts payable, accounts receivable department saying, okay, they delivered this product. It was like 3 months ago, but hey, let's get around to paying them. Whereas with the Data Gumbo system, they've gotten to a point now where they could do it like in a day, where if somebody delivers a product in the condition that they said and the exact products that they said they would deliver, they could the supplier could get paid within like a day of that. Can you imagine that? That'd be incredible. So one of the case studies that they talk about done with Data Gumbo, similar to that water case study in North Dakota, is they'll have a sand delivery. And what they would do is they would weigh the trucks as coming in, and using smart contracts, they can confirm that the sand that is delivered is the exact right amount, and it's at the pre-agreed price, and that once it's delivered, that payment is automatically triggered by the proof of the transaction. That could be the GPS tracking of the truck. You have the scale readings that are tied to the controller for the scale. And all this is recorded in real time on a shared ledger. So the payments are only triggered when all parties agree that you have all these acceptable sources of evidence, that the scale readings, the GPS tracking, maybe there's some video evidence that, hey, that supplier of sand did exactly what they said they were going to do, and now we're going to move forward with that. They're going to get paid accordingly. And so what that does, though, is, I mean, it sounds simple, but what it does, it just is able to completely wipe away and blow away so much of that hierarchical and fragmented and friction and all these different multiple layers of markups. Bottom line, if you deliver, when you say you're going to deliver, you get paid right away. So it's decreased the amount of days it took from a company to collect payment from like 3 or 4 months down to 24 hours. And it eliminated all the manual and error-prone invoicing processes and all the disputes that could take place. And it reduced anywhere from 5 to 10% of revenue that would be tied up to human error or poor change management practices. You know, whenever you're manually entering any kind of information, no matter how attentive you are and how disciplined you are, there is going to be mistakes. And they were able to move to a completely digital workflow, which was able to accelerate that workflow. And another benefit too is that for the contractors who were supplying the developers, is that for the contractors, you know, getting paid quickly is a top priority for them. I mean, who doesn't want to get paid? I mean, there's, you know, all of us can show these stories where, you know, as accountants or professional service providers, you do a service for somebody and they still haven't paid after 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. And you go, oh, please, this is crazy. I mean, this is not what I'm here to do, is to chase you to pay your money. But that's what happens in some cases. But if you can enter into a smart contract with someone and say, hey, listen, you deliver what you say you're going to deliver, we'll pay you the same day. And what that does, that's a magnet for good contractors and say, hey, if I can get my money same day, hey, I'm gonna not only want to work with you, I'm willing to cut a deal with you, because by improving the velocity of cash flow, if I know that if I deliver what you want and I get paid the same day, I will give you absolutely a discount. I will give you better terms, no doubt about that. So it just increases the willingness and eagerness and efficiency of people wanting to work, people who demonstrate that they're good corporate citizens. Another benefit too of smart contracts is that you can use it to trace the provenance or the origin of the material, where you could, on a construction site, for example, somebody could say, well, I ordered, 100 windows, and then the shipper will deliver the windows. And then after a couple of days sitting on the construction site, the foreman or the foreperson will look at this and going, well, yeah, it's windows, but it's not the windows we wanted. Hello, they're from the same company, but they're not the exact brand or type that we wanted. And they got to come back and they got to pick it up and they got to deliver it back and they got to bring the new ones again. And the whole point of this is that with blockchain, they can identify right up front, we want these specific windows from these specific manufacturers at this specific serial codes or product codes, for example. Everyone knows what the expectations are. And unless that they can prove, until they can prove that those exact products that meet those exact specifications and were made with a certain inputs or by a certain manufacturer, they could say, okay, we want to deliver these windows, but the windows that we're going to get, they have to be made by this window manufacturer in Minnesota, for example, and we're not going to expect anything less than that. The whole point of that is a smart contract. You can use that to just maintain these immaculate records of all the project information, and it supports higher quality levels of maintenance and just overall facility operations. Okay, so there's some great benefits when you're using smart contracts. I mean, you have the ability to, not entirely, but for the most part, human participation is excluded in all these transactions. It's all written into the code. It's also autonomous in the sense that, not anonymous, but autonomous. And autonomous means it operates autonomously. It operates independently. No one has to come in and manually step in and submit an invoice or deliver a product or verify a particular service. It will run automatically. So there's no follow-up needed. It's like a coffee maker. It runs autonomously. In the morning, you click a button and it will make that coffee. You don't have to grind the coffee or heat up the water with a fire or plug it in. Set it and forget it. And that's what a smart contract does. You also have this element of that it's auto-sufficient. So it will do it automatically, right? It will execute the transactions. It will spend the funds. It will collect the money. It will distribute the resources. It will track the different products that are coming onto a construction site. It will do that automatically. And really, the only limitations there are to this is the limitations are just the computer limitations, like your online storage, your computational power. Those are going to be constraints, and we'll talk more about those later in the challenges section. Another benefit to a smart contracts is that it's accurate. All the terms, all the conditions, they're laid out in explicit detail in advance. So what this means, you can't say afterwards, oh, you delivered the water, but we keyed in the wrong number from the truck, or we misplaced a zero, or we forgot to fill in that blank. There's all these pitfalls of manually filling out forms manually. And there's a problem of blank fields where there's some money or some fields that you have to put in there, but people don't put it in there. And that can involve disruptions or delays or disputes. And the more paperwork you have, the more detailed and complex it gets, the more the value of the smart contracts are, if you can eliminate as much as possible all that paperwork. Another element too is that it's transparent, so everyone knows what the terms are up front. They're accessible to all the relevant parties. Nothing's hidden, nothing's undeclared, nothing's undiscovered. You can't say, I didn't know, or I didn't know the contract stated this or that. No, you know, because you signed up front and everyone is looking at the same contract at the same time. So the communication is explicit. It minimizes the risk of miscommunication or miscommunication. And also it's paperless, of course. Everything's based online, so you don't need any paper. And if you want to promote the environment and less carbon emissions, it's great for that. You can minimize your environmental footprint. And also in the event of a disruption in power, or there's some server that goes out, each contract and transaction detail is digitally recorded. You could have a case where somebody's at the wellhead and dropping the water off, but there's some problem, the computer crashed and lost all those records. If you have a blockchain, that can happen. That won't happen, because you'll have that blockchain, you'll have that smart contract. It's recorded and shared and maintained on a multitude of decentralized nodes. So what I see is what you see is what everybody else sees. Another benefit too is that in most cases, not every case, but you can cut out a lot of the middle people needed to check or verify the transactions. There's no need for lawyers or witnesses or banks or other intermediaries, because it's all written into the code. It's written into that sensor, for example. And in many cases, you can eliminate the need for litigation or courts, for example, because by using the self-executing contract, the people who are party to that agreement, they bind themselves to the rules. They bind themselves to this self-executing contract and all this different underlying code. And another element too is trust, or rather trustless, because by their nature, smart contracts, they're transparent, they're autonomous, they're secure, they're automatically executed by the network. They're based on evidence, they're based on real life signals. And this makes it very difficult, or certainly more difficult, to manipulate them or introduce bias or error. So the trust is embedded in the transactions. It's not just a paper trust saying, just trust us. No, just saying, listen, if you do business with us and we prove that we can deliver this product or service, then you know that we are trustworthy. You know that we've agreed and facilitated our part of the deal, and you can move forward on that. Okay, so those are some of the positive sides of the smart contracts. But what are some of the challenges that you have to face and have to deal with as well? And a couple of things you need to be aware of is that smart contracts, they may not have, depending on how sophisticated and what kind of computer equipment the people that you're dealing with how sophisticated their equipment is. They may not have the sufficient backup or computing power in the event there's something goes wrong. For example, maybe you have an organization in Mexico, some growers in Mexico, for example, that are picking strawberries or blueberries, and you want to connect them, and they are connected to the blockchain, but for whatever reason, let's say their computers are run on a wireless system, but their wireless connection is not as fast as it could be, or maybe they're using an outdated version of Windows, for example. That may delay the process. So that's important to consider as well. There's these limitations on certain parties and whether or not they have the latest computer equipment, for example. Those are issues and concerns. Or what happens if the computer breaks down in the Mexican field where they're picking the strawberries? They may not have backup system there. And so that's a concern. And then there's all these different technical risks too. And humans, they make mistakes when they're coding, and there's all these technology failures that can happen. Internet service can go down, computer services can stop working, they can crash, there could be bandwidth issues, there could be these different unforeseen or unanticipated future events. There could be an earthquake or a tornado or a tsunami that could stress the technology, or there could be some difficulty in obtaining reference prices or other information to confirm whether or not something was actually executed or not. So, and also the smart contract, it has to be written perfectly and precisely. So again, garbage in, garbage out. The smart contract, it's only as good as the completeness and the veracity of the contract wording and coding. And it could be that the systems of process, they could be compromised due to human errors. There could be oversights in the contract language, for example. And another consideration too is that the contracts, changing them may be more challenging them. It's not like editing a Word document or a PDF file. You'll have the terms and conditions, they're already registered on a database. So if that's the case, if you want to make any changes to that database, it's not as if you're going to go into a Word file and highlight a few words and delete them or add a few words. You got to not only change the verbiage, but you also have to change the technical code. So what that means is you need this team, you need accountants, you need lawyers, you need programmers. All of them have to work together to make any kind of change, however modest, on a contract. And that could increase the complexities, that could increase the costs of these smart contracts. Okay, so those are other complicating factors. And again, another issue, but that's an issue that faces everybody who goes online, and that's the cybersecurity risk. And some, although they have these systems, they're as secure as they're able to make them right now, for the most part, they still could be vulnerable to hacks, and there could be theft or loss of digital assets. You could have somebody who created a smart contract, but what they may do, for example, is to say, hey, listen, for every smart contract transaction that takes place, we're going to siphon away a penny or 1/4 of a penny or 1/100th of a penny, and we're going to siphon it to our private account or something like that. So there's all these nefarious, ingenious, evil genius ways that hackers could break into a system and compromise a system that people may not be aware of. So those are some problems that you have with any kind of technology, but moving forward with, you need to be aware. And as always, whenever you're dealing with people, whenever you're dealing with humans, there's always a possibility of fraud, manipulation. There could be some backdoors where people go into the code and change it. There could be some other people who know a lot more about the smart contracts than other people and hide how much more than they know. And they'll use that to their advantage by taking money fraudulently away from key elements of that, of the contract. And we'll talk more about oracles, but what oracles are they're the arbiters, they're the gatekeepers, they're the proof testers to determine whether something is true or not when it's inputted into a smart contract. And those oracles may be compromised in some way. You need to be aware. And also is that it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity as well, is that third parties, they don't disappear. I mean, they're cut out to a large degree, but what this means is that they're playing a different role. Accountants and lawyers, they have to be tech savvy, but also that the IT specialists need to become more business and legal astute. So developing smart contracts involves this intersection, this mesh, this mashup, this integration of finance and legal and technology skill sets. And what it's doing now is it's creating all these new types of conversations and consultations and professional services in parallel industries that we've never seen before. Another consideration too is another challenge that people are facing, especially in this accounting, is the whole area of just initial skepticism. Accountants by their very nature, and it's a good thing that they're skeptical. And that's their job, is to kind of test reality. Is this true or not? Is this person providing me the latest and best and current information? And what will happen is, with any new technology, people may be additionally reluctant and skeptical, saying, okay, well, hey, it's working now. Why should I introduce blockchain? Why should I introduce smart contracts? And what that may be really saying is, they may be saying, listen, I just don't fully understand it. I don't fully trust smart contracts. So I'll kind of put my head in the stand. Another consideration too is that the space, it's still Wild West. It's still a work in progress. There's no kind of clear consensus about which standards will dominate. And a lot of the regulators still are playing catch up at this time. So it's really important to realize that it's still very much a work in progress. And it's still very much in a fluid state to move forward. And that's this fluidity means there's some constraints on its growth. Okay. Another element too I want to talk about with smart contracts, and I alluded to it earlier, is this concept of an oracle. And what an oracle is, it's a link between the physical world and the blockchain, between the physical world and the smart contract. And what it does, it confirms that the conditions that were established in a contract are actually met. Okay, so it determines, what is truth, and it supplies the data to the blockchain, for example. And it integrates all the external information. It confirms, like, that construction company, for example, that delivered the sand. The oracle is the software program, or it could actually be a human person too. The oracle is the one that makes the call on, okay, that sand that was delivered, was it actually delivered in the amount that they said they would deliver, in the quality that they said would deliver? So the measurement, the testing of that reality, did they in fact deliver the sand? That's the job of the oracle, to interpret real world events and feed that information into the blockchain. Okay, so it provides real-time data feeds. It will verify these occurrences, and it captures any kind of data that you can imagine: weather conditions, currency exchange rates, delivery. Did that product get there in the condition that they said it would get in there? Sports statistics, temperature readings, all those inputs, all those signals from the outside world that are fed into the smart contract have to go through the oracle. And the oracle provides that assurance that those conditions are met, and that truth has been, that truth is the truth before it's put into the blockchain. And also, it's really important to note there's different types of oracles. You have a software oracle, and that is an oracle that would gather information from the websites that would go on to the National Weather Service, for example, and look at prices of commodities or flight information, whether or not a train was delayed, for example. Then you have hardware oracles, and these are sensors. So, a car, a truck, a ship crossing a barrier or moving into a port, where you detect the vehicle and they're able to sense and look at an RFID, a radio frequency ID code on a container, to saying, hey, this is the container that allegedly has these products on it, or here's the car that has the shipment on it. It senses and records and puts that on the blockchain, say, here's the proof that this particular package or shipment received. Then you have inbound oracles, and that's where the smart contract gets information from the external world. For example, you may have a oracle that will track the US dollar, and if it reaches a certain currency conversion rate relative to the Japanese yen or the Canadian dollar, and what that may do is that inbound oracle, if the US dollar hits a certain price relative to another currency, then a buy order or a sell order will be activated. Then you'll have an outbound oracle, and that is the ability for that oracle to check whether or not it's appropriate to send a signal to the outside world. Like, here's an example of that. You may have an Airbnb, for example, and you have, before you allow someone access to your unit, and on your unit, you have this automated lock. But before you give the code to the person who's going to rent your unit, you want verification first that their credit card went through. And when their credit card goes through, then and only then will they get sent a message with the passcode to enter that they can plug into the door to get into their unit. And I mentioned this because this is a special place in my heart. I remember because I was using Airbnb in Hawaii, and they said, "Oh yeah, Garrett, we'd love to have you, and this is the code to get into your room." Well, the first night I got there, the code didn't work. It didn't work, so I had to go to a hotel. And it was like $400. It was like crazy. And I remember going back to the Airbnb and saying, "You owe me $400. You said I would be able to access my room, and I couldn't." And what happened is they kept putting it off and delaying it. And in the end, I was out like $400. It was crazy. So that really cranks me when I think about stuff like that. Also, you'll have the consensus oracles, where you can have an oracle that says, okay, you know what? This information is so important that we're going to have multiple oracles. We want to verify that this event that took place, we want 2, 3, 5, 10 different sensors, 10 different people, 10 different ways to verify that this happened, to make sure that if one is or two is compromised, that you can't compromise all 10 at the same time. Or if you did try to do that, it'd be virtually impossible, very difficult to do so. So that is another type of oracles. And then you have human oracles. So humans can act as oracles. Maybe they're looking at they're speaking or acting as an arbiter on the smart contracts, and they're looking at all the people who are entering information. They may do a spot audit on the people who enter information on there to make sure and look at their digital records to make sure that it aligns with the records on the smart contract. So there's all these different types of oracles that you can look at. And in terms, before I was talking about the sensors and the hardware oracles, there's different types of sensors. And I don't want to get too detailed here, but there's like the sensors that measure and generate data on everything from like location and temperature and wear and tear and chemical composition. You have the actuators, which move or control a mechanism that will turn a machine on or off. That's an actuator. And then you have the transmitter, which will take that information received from a sensor that may activate an actuator and then sends that information out to a social network or some online network. And then you have these radio frequency IDs or RFID tags. They're like barcodes that can be read automatically from a distance. And then there's all these different types of individual sensors. I'm not going to go into detail here. There's all these Internet of Things sensors that you can look at. They have them in healthcare. They'll measure and track your movement or your cardiac rhythm or your breathing or your body temperature or analyze your fluids. And of course, in automotive, it will look at everything from your fuel levels to your brake pad damage. And in manufacturing, there's countless sensors that look at humidity and air pressure and viscosity. And then you'll have all these location intelligence trackers that will track things like exactly where a particular product is or a particular service provider is at any given times. All those are tracked and recorded on a smart contract. And here's one really amazing example of smart contracts, and that is a company out of the UK called Costa Coffee. And they have these coffee machines all over the UK. And in each coffee machine, they have these sensors, and they have like 90 different measurements for each drink that is prepared on this. And they measure things like the coffee bean levels, the liquid, the levels, how close the cup is to the dispenser, what's the temperature of the water, what's the temperature of the coffee, the customer, their behavioral data. Do they approach from the left? Do they approach from the right? Do they use their left hand? Do they use their right hand? How old are they? Are they young? Are they old? And they take all this incredible demographic and behavioral data, and they put that into their system, and they use that to create this highly personalized customer experience. And they take all this data from all these different sensors, and then they'll transmit it back to head office for analysis. And they can use that to help with all this predictive maintenance, and they can just save money, and they can improve all the supply chain efficiency, where in advance they'll know if instead of having these different technicians who go out routinely, but if they find out that the machine is working fine and they can make the adjustments remotely, then they don't need to send out a technician, and that could save the cost of a service call. But on the other hand, maybe they do need a technician to go out there to replace a physical part, for example. In that case, they know, well, this person actually has to go out, but they only go out when they absolutely have to, for example. So they avoid waste, and they're much more efficient than they have been before. Then you have all these vision systems now that are being used for smart contracts that will look and capture information from imagery. And you'll have Google, they have their own system, and it's called the Google Visual Inspection AI. And this is amazing. They have this robot camera or cameras that you can set up in your factory or your shop floor or your auto dealership, wherever you want, and you can use that to track any kind of production defect, and it will do that automatically, so you can just better monitor all that's going on in your business. You're also seeing the emergence of this tool this is in China, called SenseTime. And this is a visual recognition technology that looks at people's faces and is able to snap pictures of them, and it immediately identify who they are. And that's good, and I guess that's bad. And it's good in the sense that they can use this facial recognition technology if a certain citizen is applying for benefits or applying for a pension, but it can maybe be considered an overreach because they're using that for law enforcement. For example, if you're jaywalking in Beijing, for example, and they have a camera that catches a picture of you jaywalking, you'll be penalized for that on something that's called the social credit score, where they'll have, just like in the United States and Canada, in the Western world, they have a credit score depending on how much you pay your bills and how much you provide back. But in China, they have the social credit score, and they have the score based on how well you comply with the government. Do you follow their rules? Do you buy the products that are considered a net positive for society? Like, are you buying, if they want their families, they want couples to have kids, for example, if you're buying diapers or you're buying food, or you're helping your elderly parents, that's good, and you get points for that. But if you're spending money on alcohol or spending money on video games, that's considered, or cigarettes, for example, that's considered negative, and points will be taken away. So in SenseTime in China, they're using it as a way to track and conduct surveillance on their people, for example. Okay, so that is a type of oracle that looks at and tests and verifies and vets all of these signals that are coming in from the outside world, and it will feed that into the smart contract. And you're seeing now a number of companies that provide exactly just that service. Here's a company called Provable, and that's exactly what they do. They offer an oracle service for smart contracts. Another one too is called Town Crier, where they provide this authenticated data feed for smart contracts. Another one too is called Augur, which is another oracle as well. So there's all these different tools that are out there that do that service already. Okay, another question that comes up is people say, okay, is it a legal contract? Is it the same thing as a legally binding contract? And the definitive answer is, it depends. A couple of things. First of all, do legal frameworks apply to smart contracts? Absolutely. And it's subject to the same legal frameworks as any other kind of paper-based contract. Do they abide by, do they follow any kind of federal and state securities laws? Do they adhere to the Universal Commercial Code? Do they adhere to the Electronic Signatures and Global and National Commerce Act? Do they adhere to the Bank Secrecy Act and the Patriot Act or any other anti-money laundering laws and regulations? If you contravene those or don't follow those with the smart contract, that contract will no longer be valid. So existing laws, existing regulations still apply, whether or not what form that contract takes. So that's important. And also that there's smart contracts that are just clearly prohibited if they perpetrate fraud or manipulation, or they're traded or involves processing by some company that's not appropriately registered with the health authorities, for example, or it violates any kind of federal or state regulations like disruptive trading practices, or they're not reporting, uh, they're not maintaining proper records, for example, or they're having failures in the appropriate supervision, for example. All those are ways that you could negate that particular contract. Okay, so just some quick differences between the two. You have the so-called paper-based normal contracts, and then you have the computer code. You'll have the normal contracts. They're expressed in English, like natural language or whatever your native tongue is, and they'll use the special legal terms and language that lawyers use. But the humans will carry out the performance of the contract. The humans will make delivery of the product. The humans will prepare an invoice. The humans will make the payment, but the humans can often take months to make payment because humans get tired. Humans go on vacation. Humans get sick. Humans make mistakes. Humans make errors, and that can cause problems, and that can cause delays. Okay. And whereas the smart contracts, they'll have the code that is what is expressed by the code expresses the terms of the contract on the smart contract and on the blockchain, and that computer code will only execute or carry out what is written in the software and what is verified through the different oracle. And the performance is all driven by the software, and the computer code will carry out the actions literally. Another consideration too is that if that code is ambiguous, or it's written incorrectly, or it's incompletely, or it's not up to date, the machine, they may not carry out the actions, or it may carry out them incorrectly. So it's really important that those actions are constantly updated. And also, you need, just like with any system, you need governance. You want to make sure that those smart contracts, when they're set up, that they address any challenges or risks ahead of time as much as possible. You want to create and address any kind of questions up front that people may have, and assign responsibility for smart contract design and operation, for example, and what happens if there is a dispute, what's going to happen at that point. So you want to make sure that there's certain governance and operating rules that are in place when you're creating a smart contract. So if there's some disagreement or dispute that does occur, you'll have a resolution or some way to negate that and respond to it. Okay, so the question becomes now is, what's the next step? What are some possible ways that you can move forward on this? Well, there's a number of ways. And one of the first things to realize is that you're probably using smart contracts, but you don't even know it. For example, like, Amazon, who doesn't know Amazon, is that, we talked about smart contracts. A very quick example of this is using a vending machine. But one of the things that you could do too is every time you're in Amazon, is that you can basically create your own online vending machine. You basically create your own basic smart contract, and they have a number of different services. They have subscribe and save, the dash buttons, the replenishment service, and this hands-free restocking. And I just want to talk about that very briefly. But with Amazon, they have this subscribe and save. So you could sign up for laundry detergent, paper towels, dish cleaners, trash bags, and say, hey, if you sign up to get these monthly or quarterly or weekly or whatever you want, you could save up to like 35%. Well, that's a smart contract. You have a contract that's automated, that's autonomous, that everyone knows what the deals are up front. They also have the ability to they have something that's called the dash replenishment service, where this is a feature that Amazon offers to its suppliers to say, hey, listen, if you want to be able to offer these replenishment services, here is a programming code or interface. They call it the API, or the application programming interface, that allows you to offer a automated update restocking service for your clients. So this is more of a supplier facing service that Amazon offers to its suppliers, that they can offer that subscribe and save service. And they also offer this through Alexa. You may have a smart speaker at home, and you go to Alexa and say, hey, Alexa, order me some new paper towels, or order me some new liquid gel for my shopping, for example. So there's an example of a smart contract that you can use just by talking to your Alexa or your smart speaker. And then you have other companies as well, like Best Buy. They have their own easy replenish service that you can type into. They have Home Depot. They'll have the different subscriptions that you can subscribe to. And if you subscribe to them, you get 5% off. They'll have Staples. They'll have their auto restock. They'll have Canon. This is where this is a really intriguing technology where they'll have sensors on their photocopiers. And when they detect that is when the toner cartridge is running out of ink, that they will automatically ship you a new toner cartridge. You don't have to order anything, just the machine is able to detect that. Or if they're able to determine that the machine is not working correctly, or for a part is wearing out, or it's vibrating when it shouldn't be, then they'll notify a technician in advance. So hopefully they can get there to do some preventive maintenance. So all those are ways that these companies are using smart contracts right now to offer predictive maintenance, predictive replenishment, where they can restore and update inventory without actually having to call in a particular order, because they've looked at this and they looked at the machines and they realized they're running low, and they can come back and prepare that order very quickly without human intervention whatsoever. Okay, there's some other examples too that just doesn't stop coming. There's all these other different ways that smart contracts are used. And here's one between different insurance companies. And here's a case we have like State Farm, USAA. They have something, this process called subrogation. Subrogation. What that is, that's the last phase of an insurance claim when one insurance company will recover the claim costs it pays to its customer for damages for the at-fault party's insurance. So you may have somebody from State Farm, and a customer went to them and just said, "Oh, I got hit by this car, and I can't believe how much it cost me." And State Farm go, "Okay, we'll pay you $800 for the damage." And then State Farm will go to USAA, and then it will go to USAA and say, "Hey, USAA, we paid $800 to our client because of the damage that your client did to him. So where's our $800? We want that from you." So that's what that subrogation is settling those debits between the insurance companies. And what they do now is they have been able to automate that through smart contracts, through the blockchains, where they don't have to verify through different paper. It's that they can just automate that process as quickly as possible. Another element of insurance where this is really big is called non-traditional insurance products, and this is called parametric insurance. So what will happen is some insurance companies will offer an insurance contract and reimburse a farmer if a certain, let's say, threshold of rain hasn't been met. So this is unique in a sense that traditionally, when you're thinking about insurance, is that you only can collect a claim after something has happened. And that isn't the case at all. Is that with parametric insurance, is they'll say, "Hey, listen, we'll give you a pre-specified payout if there's this certain agreed upon trigger event. Maybe there's an insufficient amount of rain. Maybe there was a typhoon. Maybe there was an earthquake. Maybe there was some locusts, or maybe there was some other natural disaster. Maybe there was a certain rainfall that exceeded a certain amount. If those thresholds are met, that will automatically trigger a payout automatically." Okay, so that's an important consideration moving forward on these different items. So the traditional insurance offers some guarantee of compensation, but it only does after you'll have someone from the insurance company. They'll go out with a clipboard, and they'll go out with their hard hat and cigar, and they'll say, "Okay, we want to check out the losses. What were the losses?" And they'll come up with an estimate on how much the losses are, and then they'll cut a check. But that isn't the case with parametric insurance. Is that what they'll do is that it does not indemnify the pure loss, but just makes a forecast on if there is a major freeze in France, for example, and in the wine vineyards, and upfront in the smart contract, they say, okay, if the temperature drops below 0 degrees on a certain date at a certain time, we will give you a 25% payout automatically. And we're going to put that in the smart contract. Or if it goes to -1 Celsius or 30 degrees Fahrenheit, we will give you a 50% payout of the insurance automatically. And if it drops below 20 degrees or something, then we'll give you the full payout. The whole point of this is that in these circumstances, the client is assumed to have suffered substantial damage. You don't need to send out somebody. They know that their crops have been damaged. Their vineyards have been destroyed to some measurable degree. So the coverage then is not based on a subjective assessment of the actual loss. It's not on having some claims adjuster coming out with a clipboard and saying, okay, this is what I think the losses are. It's based on this objective index mechanism: weather reports, hurricanes, rainfall, temperatures. What temperature? -1, +1, +2, +3. How much rain? 10 inches, 5 inches. Again, science, physics, objective reality. And it's not relying upon this subjective assessment of some insurance claims adjuster. So it's this revolution in the insurance mindset where insurers are saying, listen, we're no longer relying on any kind of loss assessment of physical damages. We're just coming up with this objective insurance data. And the whole point of this is that will speed up payment. Is that if there is a major disruption, and maybe there's a major frost or freezing that takes place in the vineyards, is that they could get their check within a day or two, and because they know that those temperatures were dropped and their crops were destroyed, and they don't have to wait. So that velocity, that friction that was in place is lessened. Okay. And it just increases the visibility of weather data and business analytics related to the performance of these different agreements. So people are realizing now, hey, there's all these external variables that we can't control. So let's build those into the insurance models to make them more predictable as possible, that everyone knows up front that if there's a hurricane, there's a flood, there's some other natural disaster, here's what's going to happen, and there's greater peace of mind, there's greater insurance that this is what the payouts will be. And also, too, it creates this audit trail of contract performance, of claims obligations, and it reduces the overall administration of manually managing the policies, because they know in the smart contract, they'll say, this is the trigger. This is how much we know that you're going to get. We're not relying on the subjective biased opinion of one claims adjuster. And also, here's another thing to consider too. You have these different claims adjuster, and just think about this for a moment. Like the claims adjuster, when they come out, first of all, how much experience do they have? Have they been doing that for 40 years versus somebody who just started? That's their first week in the job. They're going to look at that claim in a completely different light, who has more experience or not. And also, there's all the human element. What time of the day did that claims adjuster visit that site where they're making the claim? Are the claims adjusters, are they happy? Are they sad? Are they aggravated? Are they tired? Are they moody? I mean, we shouldn't overlook that. And what a big impact the physiological states, the emotional states. There's all these circadian rhythms that each one of us go through, and how much that impacts consciously and subconsciously our minds, our thought processes, our moods. All that can have a huge impact on how we interpret reality. And with these objective mechanisms, you're able to take that out. And there's a number of companies that provide that service. There's a company called Clyde & Company. They launched their parametric insurance, and they call it a connected contract service that they offer to companies all over the world with respect to solar energy. And there's another organization called Nexus Mutual that is smart contract insurance that are out there. And other examples too, smart contracts, one of which is China. And China is like way out in front of the United States and North America in terms of the use of smart contracts and blockchains. And they have something that's called the China Blockchain Plan. And they introduced this a couple of years ago. And that's their goal, is to basically migrate every bit of commerce onto the blockchain, migrate every bit of the smart contracts onto their onto their government controlled system on there. And and again, I'm not promoting the Chinese government in any way here, but one of the reasons they want to do it is, I mean, on one hand, it's more efficient for business, but on the other hand, they're able to better track their citizens, and they can conduct all their real-time monitoring of their movement and their financial transactions and their social media accounts and all their digital footprints, for example. So those are amazing. But technology is agnostic. You can use it for positive or negative, right? I mean, you have a hammer. You could build a particular. You could use it to build a house, for example, or you could use it to hit somebody over the head with it. So that's something that you may not. It's only as good as the intentions that you have to use it for. So the China blockchain plan, and they have their own blockchain service network. It's called the Blockchain Service Network, or BSN, and anybody can sign up for it if they want. And they're offering the service not just in China, but all over the world. And I'm not suggesting you put your proprietary business data on the blockchain network with China, but that's a service that they have offered on there. And now they're coming up with their own digital currency now, and they're using that for smart contracts. They're using that to exchange value and exchange money and pay people between each other. So all those are amazing tools that the Chinese government is making. And again, I'm not suggesting that we go the way of the Chinese government, but realize that there's some countries that are way ahead of the United States and North America in terms of the use of blockchain. Another consideration too is one of the leading Chinese companies called Alibaba, which is bigger than eBay and Amazon combined. But every year they have this major event. It's called Singles Day, where they have this big blockchain breakthrough. And it's held November 11th every year. And the reason it's November 11th, because November is like the 11th month, and 11 is the 11th day, of course, but they want to promote singles and people who are single. So 1 represents people who are single. So as much as possible, like November, it's the 11th month, and it's the 11th day. So 1, 1, 1, 1. Hey, we want to celebrate all the people who are happily single. And what they do is all the transactions they make on that particular day, they will they use the blockchain for that. Okay. You're also seeing that being applied in the energy area, especially with the solar panels. And there's a number of companies all over the world, but some of the leaders that they're in Europe. There's this German company called Share and Charge. And what they do is they allow homeowners to install solar panels on their rooftops. And then the energy they collect from the solar powers, they can sell to this grid, this electrical grid locally, and then this electric grid locally, in some cases, could provide electricity to other homes that aren't connected to, don't have solar power, or maybe do have solar power, but they don't have as much of, or maybe they're malfunctioning. So they've created this system of solar power sharing. And with every time a homeowner, if they have an excess amount of solar power, they can put it on the grid, and then they'll pay for it. And then they get paid through this digital wallet. They get paid through this smart contract. So if they transfer this amount of kilowatt hours from X to Y, they'll get paid for that accordingly. So there's an example of a smart contract in place. So it creates this entire new sharing economy based on electricity. Okay. And then there's another one too in Germany. It's called the Sonnen community. It's the same thing. It's this subscription-based solar energy services. If you have a solar panel in your house and you want to share the solar energy that you've captured, you can do so in a local grid. Anything that you do share will be shared automatically. And they have that as well in North America. They have something that's called the Brooklyn microgrid. So they have these smart contracts that are set up where neighbors can trade energy that they've generated from solar panels with one another. So one person may have a solar panel and another person may not. And if one neighbor's solar panel is able to generate more electricity than the other person's can supply, then they'll get extra energy credits that could be sold to the neighbor automatically through a smart contract. Okay. And then other these are variations of the theme, but here's one that's called Me Solar Share. Again, it's a peer-to-peer trading network of these different rural households. You're seeing this also in letters of credit. And that's, you have the bank guaranteeing that a buyer's payment to a seller will be received on time. But even now, so many of those are based on emails and paper transactions, but it's huge. It's like over $2 trillion worldwide, about almost like 15% of all goods that are financed by letters of credit, and they're sent by email, and there's errors, there's delays, there's all this lack of transparency. So what they're doing now is you'll have organizations like the Bankers Association for Finance and Trade. They've gotten together and said, listen, let's come up with some new standards for blockchain, for letters of credit, where we can share this information automatically. And as a result of that, you'll have this group called Marco Polo. And it's now they have over almost like 200 different banks that are involved with this. And what they do is they are now working together to administer different smart contracts to administer letters of credit. Okay, and there's other organizations like E-Trade Connect. They're based out of Hong Kong. WeTrade, and this is an amalgamation of the Deutsche Bank and HSBC and other European banks are working together. There's Bank Chain. This is based out of India that uses blockchain and smart contracts for letters of credit. There's an organization called Chain at chain.com. Okay, so there's all these different players that are involved in trade finance to expedite that particular process. And also, they're even using it for real estate. There's a couple of companies called Shelter Zoom that are using smart contracts to buy and sell and rent real estate. There's Proppy, that's another one too as well, where you could buy or sell your home using smart contracts. Streetwire is another one. So, and we all know the overhead costs of selling property here where I am, especially in Vancouver. It's just enormous. It's astronomical. I mean, you want to sell your house here, it's going to cost you anywhere from $50,000, depending on how much your what price point that you're at. But there more and more solutions are coming up that allow people to sell their homes, to sell their major assets using these blockchain systems. You're also seeing the emergence of smart contracts and blockchains for digital identification. And this is when it's called Uport, where you can, before you go into Uport and you set up a personal profile, and you could say to people, say, hey, listen, you want to get more information from me? Okay, but you have to prove to Uport that you are who you say you are. You have to verify that you're an insurance provider, you're a medical provider, you're some other person who needs to see my information. And only if you verify that will I surrender my personal information. Okay, and here's one, they use smart contracts for streaming. This is called Peer Tracks, and it uses smart contracts for automated royalty payments. So in this case, if a company is able to track when a particular song is played, they're able to record that and put that on the blockchain. Okay, so the question now is okay, that's interesting, all this smart contract is exploding and there's all these new use cases and we're seeing all these greater efficiencies and there's all these positive benefits to it. But what about me? How is it going to impact the accounting profession? Well, there's a couple of things that need to be aware. First of all, there's a number of companies that are already all in. Here's a company, they're out of Tampa, and they're called Shellman, and that's exactly what they do. They offer, they're called crypto and digital trust services, but what they do is they're involved in blockchain, they're involved in smart contracts, they're involved in digital credentials. So if you're looking for a real world case study of an accounting firm that's already in that space providing advisory services, look no further than Shellman. And what accountants can do in terms of smart contracts is that they can work with attorneys, they can work with programmers, they can ensure that that smart contract is, quote, on the money. They can look at the financial position of all the different parties. They can research and analyze all the different financial implications. They look at all the different tax effects of all the different outcomes. And that's what CPAs are. That's who they do. They're precise in analyzing numbers and getting the books to match and minimizing their tax obligations. Okay. And also, it's great for finance departments, especially when there's a high volume transactions where companies are tracking thousands or maybe even millions of types of different products where you have all these radio frequency ID tags. You can use smart contracts to settle and track and trace all these different products that are migrating through that process. and they can maybe really accelerate that process, especially if there's any processes that are done by hand or manual entry. They're able to settle at a much lower cost, and they can free up time for the people that they do have on other more higher level businesses as well. And then you could do audits of the smart contract. So what you would do is you would examine the code of a smart contract. You would look at how it interacts with the value transfer. Maybe it's how it interacts with a blockchain or the cryptocurrency, or maybe some regular fiat currency. And you could, the accountant is there to identify any errors or issues or security vulnerabilities to recommend, and they're there to recommend improvements and solutions, for example. So that's another element. And also they can get involved in Oracle audits. We talked about Oracle as the interface between the smart contract in the real world, and the auditor could verify the interface between the smart contract and the external data sources, and they could provide that independent, objective, impartial, unbiased evaluation to identify any errors or vulnerabilities. And what this means, though, is that the Oracle, we're going to have to take on all these, they're going to have to understand all these new technical programming languages as never before. And they're also could perform like different blockchain audits. They can look at the blockchain themselves to make sure that the blockchain, the technology side of that, it's robust, it's stable. They'll look at the architecture of it. Does it meet the current technology requirements? They could serve as an administrator, where they could vet people before somebody becomes part of a smart contract. They could vet that person, saying, hey, can we trust you? What is your past history like? What do you pay your bills? Will you honor your contract that you put on the that you put on this automated agreement, for example? And without this independent overseer, there could be risks where that person who is a user, who is a node within that blockchain, maybe they're inputting the wrong information. Maybe they're deliberately putting in false information as well. So you have to check anytime there's human beings involved, there's a capacity for fraud and manipulation. They could also perform, accountants or CPAs or tax attorneys, they could perform a arbitration function. It'll be almost like an executor of an estate. So they could look at the contract terms, they could look at the spirit of the smart contract, and is that being adhered to in many ways. So there's all these new rules where, and it's just changes. Like right now, a lot of accounting transactions, a lot of paper, a lot of manual work. There's all these different delays. We saw that in the construction industry, for example, where they're waiting a minimum of 45 days, and the processing times could take as much as 4 months, or tax preparations, for example. But what you could do, though, is that with smart contracts, you could, with tax preparations, for example, they could just completely automate a lot of the procedures. What'll happen is, like currently now, a lot of the salaried staff members, they pay their taxes through employers who function as intermediaries, for example, and gather details on them. So an employer, or employee rather, what they'll do is they'll work, and what they'll have, though, is the boss, the responsible, they're supposed to report on how much money they paid their workers, and then they'll report that to the IRS, and then they'll have to pay a certain amount of those wages to the IRS. But smart contracts completely could take that out, where the worker, they could enter their income information onto some federal government tax portal, for example, and then that information could be just collected automatically. Another consideration too is that contract management, it's a long-term game, in the sense that when these contracts are set up, they're multi-year, and they can run 2 weeks, they can run 10 years for some of these contracts. And what will happen is the person who wrote the contract is not necessarily the person who manages the contract, because that can change over time, because people come and go, they take in positions. And the whole point of, if the more you are able to automate that process, you're able to better maintain and manage and oversee and govern and test that particular contract to make sure that it's running as safely and smoothly and efficiently and profitably. And especially if it takes over time, and if the contract runs over 5 or 10 years or something, there could be all these errors and miscommunications that can take place. But if it's done automatically, there's less chances of that happening. Also, another great possibility is one of compliance. And right now, there's compliance, the IRS, or there's some regulatory organization you have to belong to, if you're the Department of Health, or you're involved in any kind of medical field, for example, or there's all this personal identifiable information you have to make sure that's very kept, or maybe you're working with some environmental hazardous materials and those have to be reported to the appropriate authorities, and you need to keep track of all that paperwork. But if you have an automated smart contract, it will do that for you. It will tell you about, you have to release this filing. You will tell you have to release this submission. It will auto renew. It will auto release all these different digital findings that people may have about particular processes that are coming through. And then also, governments worldwide now, they're using it as a tool to increase compliance, to reduce fraud. And in the UK, for example, they have the UK tax agency, like they're equivalent to the IRS, and they're called the HMRC. And I guess it's His Majesty's Revenue and Customs with the new king. And they have something there, it's called Making Tax Digital, where now every firm in the United Kingdom, they must submit their tax returns digitally. There can be no manual intervention whatsoever. You're seeing in Brazil, all the companies now have to provide their full books when they're filing a tax return. That includes their entire transaction ledger, their entire record of inventory transfers, all the balances before and after the period. Then the whole point of that is they want to make sure that all the books tie to themselves. Right? So all those are examples of how the governments around the world are really adopting smart contracts and adopting digitalizations at a rapid pace. And also, accounts payable, it'll just speed up that process so much faster. You can respond to reshipment of shipments and payments. It could automatically record a corresponding journal entry on both parties, for example, submitting purchase orders, buyers receiving goods. I'm not going to go through these all in great detail here, but you get the picture, is that smart contracts and the blockchain, they're able to automate so much of the accounting workflow, where you can it will free up time for accountants now to ensure the accuracy of smart contract inputs, for example. They'll have more time to analyze transactions rather than just entering them. They'll have more time to recommend rules to government smart contracts and to advise on smart contract terms, for example. And they'll be able to use smart contracts to provide more granular reports and more detailed financial statements, because that's what smart contracts and the blockchains will automatically do. They can summarize all these current financial statements. So it's important now that accountants prepare themselves and they realize that they need to position themselves and move beyond transactional and just the checking part, and they have to migrate to a more higher value activity. They have to go beyond transaction processing and reconciliation, but to more creative roles: analytics, decision report, strategy, business partnering. They need to focus more on high value activities, not just on back office, because the machines and the computers can do that. And let the robots do what they do best. Let them verify the data. Let them look through the detailed numbers. And your job as an accountant is freed up. I mean, you want to check those numbers at all times as well, but you want to focus in on more complex transactions. You want to focus on more value-added activities. You want to focus more on risk management and business strategy and looking forward. That's where you can make the most impact. Okay, so in terms of, what are the leading platforms for smart contracts, for blockchain? There's organizations and platforms like Ethereum and Cardano and Third Web. Polkadot is another one that you can look at. There is, I'm just going to go through these very quickly, but they're in your handout here, but I'm not going to go into great detail here, but I wanted to show you in brief what the software is for blockchain and smart contracts. Traditionally accountants work with Word, PowerPoint, Excel. Well, this is like the Word, PowerPoint, Excel equivalents for the blockchain industry. Tools like Interity and Qtum, Credits, Chainlink, RSK. I'm just going to fly through these, but all these are examples of blockchain technology. There's also these great resources. If you want to explore further, there's all these great opportunities. There's a Smart Contract Summit that is held every year. that if you want, you can go to, or you can go online and see the presentations virtually. And this is the equivalent of Excel for smart contracts, and it's a software called Solidity. And just like Excel is like the foundation and the backbone and the base of accounting, that's what Solidity is for contracts. So if that's something that interests you, you want to get involved in programming and programming smart contracts, that's one place to go to. It's called Solidity. They also have a tool called the Smart Contracts Alliance, where they have all these different business people from all over the world get together to look at ways that they can apply smart contracts in their own business. They'll have the Chamber of Digital Commerce, and they get together. They're a smart contract and blockchain advisory group. There's a blockchain council that get together, look at different use cases and products, and to increase their knowledge of the blockchain. The Risk Stream Collaborative that are online. There's a business LinkedIn group that looks at blockchain. There's other resources that you can tap into as well. Open Law that you can look at. And then there's a number of training courses that you can take. There's actually a certification you could take if you want. It's called the Certified Smart Contract Developer that's offered by the Blockchain Council that you can look at. There's a number of smart contract courses from Udemy and Coursera and Global Knowledge and Noble Prog that you can take that will allow you to skill up and learn more about different elements of smart contracts. And in terms of what's ahead, as I mentioned, the regulatory landscape is still evolving. It's still in its infancy. It's still highly fractured. But what you're seeing now is the emergence of a growing consensus. And you're seeing the W3C, which is a World Wide Web Consortium, they are now working together to develop new web standards. There's something that's called the Common Accord, and they're now working on coming up with new standards. Just as like there's generally accepted accounting principles, they want to come up with generally agreed smart contract principles and generally agreed blockchain principles. That's one of their objectives as well. Okay, we're out of time here. So 3 things I want you to take away from today's presentation. Number 1 is, what are smart contracts? So smart contracts, they're blockchain-based software that automates the if this, then that performance of contracts. They're self-executing, they're immutable, they're auto-enforcing agreements, they're written within computer code, but they're executed in real time. And this will help you exchange anything of value in this transparent, conflict-free way of doing business without avoiding the services of a middle person. Well, it's still a work in progress. Smart contracts are on course to radically transform commerce. And it's using all these data sources, using oracles to improve accuracy and increase transparency and speed up processes and enhance security and reduce costs and embed trust and guarantee outcomes and much more in these legal enforceable agreements. And finally, smart contracts offer countless ways for CPAs to streamline contract performance, to automate their own accounting operations, to offer smart contract advisory services, and to use those to help them drive process improvement and accelerate workflow and reduce operational security risks. And you can incorporate smart contracts into your own digital solutions toolkit to further elevate your elite status and reputation as a world's most trusted business advisor, as an arbiter of truth, and as a protector and guardian of the public trust. So, to wrap up, again, we talked about what is a smart contract, some key considerations. We looked at a number of use cases in auto finance, logistics, oil and gas, construction. We looked at some of the benefits, some of the challenges. We looked at what is an oracle. Is it the same as a legally binding contract? It depends. We talked about some personalized smart contracts you can get with Amazon and Alexa and Home Depot. We looked at other case studies from insurance and what's going on in China and all the different roles that accountants can place in maintaining and being an arbiter and administrating smart contracts, how it's going to transform the accounting profession, who are some leading developers, some key resources, some leading courses, what's ahead, and the key takeaways. And that has been Smart Contracts for Accountants. Thank you so much for participating. And back to you, Sherry.
Garrett, thank you so much. That was a lot of information that was covered in a very brief session. I believe Bianca said that she loved the Costa Express. And then just to wrap up the session today, thank you again so much for attending today's presentation. Remember to receive the CPEs, you have to go to the learning page. Certificates will be available in the next 14 days. We appreciate your participation and look forward to having you in a future session. Garrett, thank you so much for your session today. Please post any questions that you may have in the Q&A for Garrett, and I will keep it open for the next few minutes. Garrett, hopefully you can see all the positive feedback in the Q&As, lots of thank yous and great responses, and feedback on a wonderful presentation.
Yes, I have it. Thanks everyone for your kind words. I really appreciate that.
So I'll give it about another minute if anybody else has any questions. I'm gonna give it one more minute. For those of you remaining, I am posting the steps in the Q&A on how to access your certificates. All of that information is going to be on your dashboard. All right, it is now 3:50 on the East Coast. And I am going to go ahead and close out the session. I have posted my email address in the Q&A. Please let me know if you have any other questions. You can reach out to me directly. Garrett, again, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. We look forward to having you back again in the near future. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to having you back again next week. With that, take care, and we will see you soon.